Good morning. Middle of the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, Mikashem Alekenu, Maamorei AdHamtz Bereishis, page 379. Central theme here is the process of creation, the relationship basically between the creator and the creation, between us and God. And it's a multi-step process. Thought, speech, action, bri, yitzir, asiya, where just as from our thoughts formulate words, letters, that in turn define an action, an actual created action, God too creates in that fashion, with the thought being closest, so to speak, to the creator, and the action being the product. So koyach hapoel benifel means the power of the producer, his thought and his speech that is invested in the action. And as he explained, that they all overlap. There's the dibur connects to the thought, and the action connects to the dibur, the speech, the words, the letters. And like we learned in the last class, the two levels of gilui in the parentheses. Beis mina gilui hadibur ba'asiyah, and Gili HaMachshava Shebedibur, which I elaborated on. I don't have to go over it again now. And that's why the Zohar calls and defines it as engraved letters. As we explained, because engraved emphasizes the deeper connection, the integral connection between the thing that's being being engraved into what it is being engraved into, the letters into the stone. So as he put it, and he said, so it has two manifestations. One is chikika se'esi, the dibur k'shabala maisa, the chikika, or the engraving of the letters as it comes into maisa, which means that they are integrally connected and seamlessly flowing from one to the next. That the letters themselves are b'tzir begili mehelam the machshava, they're like engraved into the thought. So basically the thought is either engraved into the dibur, or the dibur is engraving letters into the thought. It doesn't exactly spell it out, but it's clearly it's connected in that fashion. That the very letters are an expression of the very essence of the thought of God in creation. So all this is coming to explain the idea that the divine immutability, the Leishanisi that we spoke about, that God is not affected by. And I should begin first, that he has nothing in commensurate, nothing in common, yesh ma'ayin, with creation, and he's not affected by it, is true even as it comes down into Maisa B'Peil, because he called this Maisa B'Peil, Benifel, the third level of the three levels. Now he's going to go back and explain how even this third level, all these three levels, all remain and retain their divine nature. So in contrast to Neshama B'Guf, where there he explained there is effect of the body's experiences on the soul, on the lower levels of the soul, not the higher levels. That when it comes to the divine, not just the higher levels of the divine, but also the levels of the divine that manifest the producer, Koyach HaPoel Benifel, also are not impacted. We're not talking through Aveda now. We're talking the process of creation. That's what he's going to come to explain as we continue reading now. And as I said, in Ayin Beis, all this becomes much clearer, and I'll point that out when we finish the next section. We will see how it's spelled out in Ayin Beis. So with that, I'm going to start reading from. I mentioned the parentheses should conclude on the line Eisir Shenivra Behen Chulu. That should be the end of that short parentheses, which is essentially 8 lines from the top of the page. 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah. So we're starting from the words Avol Muvan. So now that we've established these 3 stages in the creative process, Bria, Yitzira, and Asiya. Bereishis bara, Vayomer Elikim, Vayehi Oyer. Right there you have all 3. Bara, Vayomer Dibur, and bara is Bria Machshava, Vayomer Elikim Dibur, and Vayehi Oyer is Maisa. Now that we established that, Aval Muva now, however, Aval is a qualification, but it's understood, Al Kaponim, that despite the fact that there are three stages, Al Kaponim, the bottom line is understood, you can't distinguish at all, klal, absolutely, unequivocally, you cannot distinguish begimel madreges, the machshava dibur amaisa, between the three levels, which is why he was so adamant in establishing that they are seamlessly flowing from one another, because that's how it's supposed to work. It's not three separate entities. It's not machshava here and dibur there and maisa there. It's one seamless flow from a more sublime state into a more concrete state, basically. Kamoi ba'adam, like it is even by a person, for sure by Hashem. Shemitzava lases machshava shebedibur. The adam begins by commanding, by giving instructions, machshava shebedibur. He has a thought. That thought in turn turns into machshava shebedibur, that goes into dibur, which in turn informs the action. V'zeu gam ken lamayla. And above is also the way. Masha kosav ashabara likim. That what it says, ashabara likim, be'esius machshava shebedibur, kedei lases mash. So the words of ashabara likim lases. That's the expression in the pasuk, ashabara likim, that God created lases. So is it bara, which we explained as bria machshava, or lases? So he says, say bara likim be'esius machshava shebedibur, the letters that first formed the machshava, which in the dibur, that went into the dibur, kedei lases mamish, in order, it's not just Bashabara Elikim. Ashabara Elikim lases, kedei lases mamish, to create actually something, shenikra koyach hapel benifel. That's called koyach hapel benifel. In other words, it doesn't remain in God's thought, and not only and doesn't remain in the speech, it actually comes into an action, the creation of existence. So the creation is an actual creation with the power of the creator invested in it, the power of the producer in the product. Well, the fizeh, now that we know that it's all, like he says, you can be machalik, it's all one flow from through all three levels. Lefizeh, according to this, how do you move on? Memela. It's inevitably understood, or automatic. Memela means it's self-understood. The kamoisha ain't shine be'eda leki. Just like there's no change or shift in the eda leki, the asius shmei, the malchus, in the letters of Shmoi and Malchus, like we spoke, Afal Pi, She'ena Rak Heidei V'Zivoi, even though as we spoke, Malchus is only his glory, his reflection, but there's no Shini in that. We said there's no Shini in the Oyer when it transmits to it the recipients. Kamesha Kosov, Hoidu al Eretz V'Shamayim, Hoid Shmoi. Hoidu means his Hoid. Hoid is his reflection, or his sometimes beauty, sometimes his glory. Hoit Shmoi. So it's referring to the reflection. What?
Hoidoi.
What did I say? Hoidu. Hoidoi, right. Not Hoidu as in Meide, correct. Hoidoi al Eretz V'Shamayim, Hoit Shmoi. So Hoidoi. So we see from that it's only a Hoid, it's only a reflection. Ukamesha Kosav. So he's going to be basically still in the middle of the opening of the sentence. He's going to conclude, just like there's no shinui there's no shinui in the lower levels as well. So just like there's no shinui he says in the Eira Liki, the Asiya Shmei de Malchus, Heidei, Kamesha Kosav, the Kaidem Shenivra Elam. The Asiya is the Yud Memoras Hoyahu Ushmei Hazeh Belvad. Like it says, Achale Nivra Elam Hoyahu Ushmei Belvad. That means prior to existence, the Asius, these letters that are in the 10 Maamores, Vayehu Ushmoy Hazeh Belvad. It was only him and his name. What is his name? These letters. They were there before. So that means when they now come into speech that ultimately will create, they're the same as they were there before without change. And afterwards, after the creation, these letters come out now shining and illuminating in a revealed way, be'esius, machshava, dibur, u'maisa, in the letters of thought, speech, and action. So in other words, within the Godhead, within the godly divine energy, before creation, it was all there on that level. Then afterwards, it comes into letters, first thought, speech, and action. B'chol elam v'elam b'frat, in each world, specific world, shekol magimel madreges dibiyak in yudua, that are encompassed, these worlds, each world and every world is encompassed of all three levels of Bria, Yitzira, and Asiyah, Machshava, Dibra, Maisa. So just like there's no shinui there, Kach Mamish ain't shinui be'esis adibur shebasiyah. So just like there's no shinui in the letters in Malchus, even before Machshava and then in Machshava that goes into Dibur, there's also shinui in the esis adibur shebasiyah. There's no shinui, there's no change in the letters that he speaks as it manifests into Asiyah. So think again of the practical thing. The king or the leader has an idea. His thought, he came up with, he conceived of something, of a order that of something he wishes. He then calls in his ministers or he calls in his advisor, whoever, and he commands them and says from his machshava, it's spelled out into a decree, into a gzera. This is the law that I'm setting down. Var melech shilton, like you said before. They in turn implement it. So when this is done properly, it's all one seamless flow. The implementation, the end process of actually implementing the command, which followed the thought, is all one flow. It's the thought that informs the rest. So there's no shinui, just like there's no change within how it starts within in this case, the melech. There's no change also of how it comes from dibur into maisa. Dibur, when he says adibur sheba, esis adibur sheba asiyah. So even though it is coming down in a lower level, but it's all the flow of the divine energy exactly as God wanted it. He's now going to explain how this works, both sides of it. Because seemingly you could argue that once it comes down, like we spoke about yesh miyesh, a teacher to a student, there is an effect on the teacher as he gives it to the student. But that's not how it is Lamaila. So he's going to explain that now as we go on. So if that's what's still, if you're not understanding that, don't worry. That's exactly what the Mikla Rebbe is going to explain now. So unless somebody has a question what we just read, I'd like to read further to get the whole picture, and then we can come back and review if anything needs more clarity. That's what I would suggest. Again, unless somebody wants to ask something about what we just read.
Why does it say at the beginning, toward the beginning of what you read this morning, shemitzvah lasos machshava shebediva?
Not mitzvah, shemitzvah lasos.
That's commanded to do this?
Like he spoke earlier. If you go back earlier, he used that expression one or two times, where if you go back like 6 lines from the bottom of last page, he used that expression. Basically, this process, the king commands. That's Eisis Adibur, following his thought, which in turn informs the action.
I know, but here it says Ba'adam. This is how it is by us, no?
So go back, you'll see 6 lines at the bottom of last page. She talks about how it is by a human being as well.
Okay. All right, I'll go back and look at it. Thank you.
That's the muscle. We are an example. When we do the same thing, we do it. That's how we do it. Also, we start with thought, speech, and action.
I see. I got it. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, good. So it continues. So in other words, this shinui continues throughout the flow from the highest levels all the way downwards. So he says, "V'gam b'koyach eliki hamitzumtzum." So now he's going to address the fact that koyach eliki that is in Maisa is obviously much more diminished than it is in Machshava or higher. So he says, also this divine power, that's mitzumtzum, that's diminished or concealed, b'pu'ula atzma, in the actual action. Remember, we spoke, even speech is he called as nifrad, is nivdal. Speech means that God is speaking that others can hear. So there's already another. Action is even more so. So it's clearly not remaining. It's not just God says, I think, and therefore that creates. So it's speech action. So in the pu'ula, atzma shu nivdul ma'ir aliki atzme. When you look at the product, let's take tzemeach, a blade of grass, a bird, an animal, anything. From our point of view, you see an entity that was created. Yes, it has a koyach hapel benifel. It has a divine creative energy within it that is sustaining it and maintaining it and so on. But now something has been created. We don't say it's a dimyon. We don't say it's an illusion. There's an actual creation here. The creation is a direct product and a direct result of the machshava dibur that is infused in it. But there's nivdal me'er aliki atzmi. So he says, so there the koyach aliki within it, you would think maybe has undergone a change. He says, Ari ein shine klal. There's no change from the point of view of the creator of energy. Even though it's become diminished, but from his point of view, the creative energy, there's no shine klal. V'lo yitakim gam boy inyan erech v'shine v'yispailis kanal. And it's not possible. It's not possible to apply any type of erech, any type of commonality or commensurate relationship, and v'shine yispailis is bringing both things together now, the commensurate element, erech, which in that is independent also, when there's a shine yispailis means because there's some relationship. And therefore, they interact with each other, they impact each other. Shine yispailis, change and effect, canal. Mishum, why? Because this maisa, even as it comes into a pu'ula, into an action that from our end is like separate, miyuchad by atzmus alakuz the malchus datzilus, is fundamentally united with the core of a divine in malchus datzilus where it originates from. Again, the fact that we don't see it or feel it is not relevant here to this point. So in that sense, there's no shinui. Ki yadua, like he says, the malchus datzilus, as its own malchus datzilus, misamtzim, ad malchus the malchus dasiya. Malchus datzilus, as we learned quite a few times, especially in Ayin Beis with the parsa, the partition, the malchus of Atzilus, which carries all the energy of Atzilus, gets diminished and concealed as it descends downward all the way to the lowest levels through Bria, through malchus of Bria, through malchus of Yetzirah ad, the malchus of Asiya. In malchus itself, the malchus of Asiya, the lowest level. Lias Mokah Liasavus, where it becomes the source for the creation of a Hagalgalim, of the spheres, the Galgalim of the 9 so-called spheres that the Rambam and talks about in the astronomical spheres that are orbits, so to speak, around, or atmospheres, if you wish, around the earth, Va'aretz and the earth. V'chol asher bahem, and everything created on earth, in these Galgalim and the earth. Bli shinui klal uklal. Without any absolute, no change at all. No change or shift. So the change or shift is in the recipient's experience, what we receive. Similar, like you would say, not the element of the exertion of the teacher, but the teacher's brilliant mind does not change just because he was mitzamtzim and diminished it in order to spoon feed it to a child, to a beginner student. Even though it's not a perfect example, because we learned that the mashpia makabel, there is an effect on the mashpia, because while he's doing it, he's involved, he can't be doing something else. It could also deplete his energy. It doesn't deplete his seichel, but it could deplete his energy. So there are distinctions. But in one aspect, it's similar that the source does not change as a result of it coming down through these tzimtzumim. And the Rebbe, Mittler Rebbe continues, V'raya, and a proof for this, that there's no change, is min ha'ashgocha haprotis, from the divine providence that exists in this world, that God oversees every detail, even the turning of a leaf in the wind. We'll soon see how that's a proof, but it's going to say, ukenisim, another thing besides ha'ashgocha protis, and like the miracles, beneflois, and the wonders, b'shini hateva. So hashgacha pratis is even in nature. Now he's bringing miracles and wonders when there's a suspension or a change in nature. So in other words, for example, like I mentioned, the Kriyas Yamsuf, where God is causing the water to rise so they can walk through the dry land that was that was remained empty when the waters rised. So that's a shini and teva. So these nisim neflois, he says, shenira la'ayin, she'en shini klal, you could see with your eye. We'll soon understand what that, we need to understand what that means, you see with your eye. But he's saying that you actually see, she'en shini klal, there's no change at all, be'etzem eliki, in the very divine energy, gam b'meshe babet simsim ha'achlin yeser, even that which comes down in the ultimate lowest symptom, in the lowest form of concealment, because there's nothing commensurate, there's nothing in common between a balgvul, which is creation, the finite creation, and bilti balgvul, the creator that's infinite. And their entire creation, even that level that is the energy and the divine energy and vitality, shenivdal ma'asmus, even though that energy has somewhat separated. What it means separated? It's now entered into another consciousness. Nothing is outside of him, God forbid. He encompasses it all. So in other words, there's really like two perspectives here. Our perspective, where we experience only a minimal amount of it, and God's perspective, where it's just simply different gradations of his divine energy. And therefore there's nothing outside of him. So he's soon going to bring more statements to establish the case. That's why I don't want to stop, because the Mittler Rebbe style is that it all builds upon each other, like I said. Didn't fully explain it yet till the end of the topic, but he's going to say more in the topic. But meanwhile, that's what he says. So what do we know from Hashgacha? Let me just say something about Hashgacha Pratis, Nisim, and Fleis, and then continue. And if you allow me, I'd like to finish till the end of the paragraph, hopefully till next page, before I take questions, because there's so much that it's dependent on the case that he's building here to read further, that if we stop in middle here, you're going to have inevitably questions. Might as well finish the whole picture that the Rebbe, Mittler Rebbe is laying out here. So the Hashgacha Pratis most obviously means that the fact that the divine, if you said Hashgacha was only on the higher worlds with his divine revelation, but Hashgacha Pratis means every detail in existence. Even when we see a leaf, and the leaf doesn't seem like it has any purpose, but we know that God is guiding and guiding every detail of existence. That tells you there's no shinui. That means the same God, the same godliness as it is in the highest levels, is involved in every detail. Let's go back to the example with the king or the leader. He gave his thought led into a command that led into an action. So even though the action of the subject somewhere in his empire may not even see the king, but the king's commands and the king's intentions are guiding every detail of his empire. There's no change. The only thing that's changed is that it's extended itself to every detail and it's come into action. So that's Hashgacha. The same thing with Nisim. What does Nisim mean? The fact that there can be a Shinui HaTeva in this world means in a world where there's a Teva, where there's a natural order, and there are laws and rules and structures, that God again, and what he means, Nira Ba'ayi, means you see practically, nothing changes. The same God, like we said before, Misha Omer L'Shemen Yadlik, the same God that says that shemen, oil, should burn, should be fuel, can say that vinegar should be fuel. And nothing's changed from his point of view. What's changed is that vinegar now can be fuel. So bottom line is, all that indicates there's no shin in the Ereliki. Ereliki does not change as a result of it, even if it changes the result, so to speak. So in other words, the shinui happens in the action, but it doesn't happen in the creative energy that creates that action. And that's what he's going to continue to explain. So because bottom line is, nothing is chutz mimenu. Everything is ein arech klal, even the things are completely diminished, so there's nothing commensurate. If there was something commensurate between the divine energy and between the product and the producer, then you could say the producer is some way impacted, but there's nothing common in them. That kol yitzur, everything that was shaped, is all part of the Creator. Ve'necha pekuches, v'loy niskanu. He's bringing a number of lashenas, but down below, they tell us where they all come from. This is all a combination of the bracha zichrenas that we say Rosh Hashanah. Kol Yisur Sha'ati Yitzarta. I see it says Yirmiyahu and Tehillim. 3 different psukim. Ve'necha pekuches. I have to look up how that's relevant here, because it means your eye. Okay, God is watching. That God is watching all the time. V'loy niskanu, like we said before, niskanu aliyos. To Him, He has organized. He has control over all details.
V'loy niskanu.
Loy niskanu. Yeah, loy niskanu. It says kel deis havai loy niskanu. Kamoshe kosav, and now He connects it to the theme of the Maimah that we're going to learn later, and we learned in Tereid. Hamagbi, Kamoshe is bar. Hamagbi l'sheves. Remember, Hamagbi. He comes down l'sheves, brings down the energy down below. And then Hamagbi l'sheves is, I'm sorry. Hamagbi l'sheves was the level of what was the level, like mitzvahs, I think. 1 second. How did he explain? Let me just give me a second here. I think the connection with Hamagbi l'sheves is going to be he. Remember the Hey and the Yud, that it came down, l'sheves. Yeah, the bottom line is that the highest levels come down below. That's what he's trying to emphasize here. We'll learn more about it later, and then we can understand it better. Okay. And even though God, the Creator, is not commensurate to the worlds that are finite, and therefore it has no effect, no change in effect in him. Here again, you see how the Mittler Rebbe builds the case as we go. He could have said this earlier, but he says it now. That's his flow. Im tzedakta, if when you do kindness, when you do tzedek, justice, matitanle, what does it add to him? It doesn't change anything in him. So even though that's the case, yet he does come down and energize that level. So the Mittler Rebbe says, like we learned earlier, the expression, Vishnei emes. Remember he said, Muchach lema, that Shnei emes. He said exactly that language twice before, if I recall correctly. That both are true. Just want to find where he said it, because it was very jumped out. Naim Beis, I remember exactly where he said it. 1 second. Where did he say Shnei Emes? Okay, I don't remember, I don't see it right now, but I remember he definitely said it. Oh yeah, here, top of page 376. So Muchrach lema de Shnei Emes. There he said it by the soul, that the soul is affected, not affected. But now he's saying the Shnei Emes. What's Shneim? The Einam Seisim as a klal, because they don't contradict one another, because it would seem to think, since it's coming down koyach hapoel benifel, God doesn't remain removed from it. He is investing his energy into the dibur and into the maisa all the way in the lowest levels. And at the same time, you're saying he does not affected by it. So he's saying he's qualifying. It's not, they're both true, they don't contradict each other. Ubaloshon ha-Gemara, like the language of the Gemara, Zeu Shomar, Dehu Mekeme Shalelam, Ve'ena Elam Mekeme. He is the space of the world. He encompasses the space of the world, but the world does not encompass his space. Just mom is this idea. In pantheism, in Spinoza's pantheism, he says God is nature and nature is God. They're synonymous. Like Mamala Kalam, that's God, only Mamala Kalam. We say God is nature, but nature is not God. God is a lot beyond nature. There's also Sevav Kalam. There's also higher levels. So yes, he is everything, but not everything is him. Everything is him in a way because everything is godly, but everything does not define him because he's more than it. So existence is a part of the whole. The whole is not a part of the part. If you know what I'm saying. In other words, let's say if you take a large mass of, let's say, 1 million square feet. So the 10 square feet within it, the 1 million square feet encompass the 10, but the 10 don't encompass the 1 million. Just as a simple mathematical example. Here, obviously, it's far more than that because it's infinite and so on. And the language of the psalmist or the hymn, the one who wrote the hymn, how do you say, hymnist? I don't know if that's a word. But the payat is a piyut, was be a hymn, and a payat is the one that composes it. It's like a poet. Maybe from the same word, payat, poet, maybe. Seveles hakel. He brings out the piyut of Melech Elyon, the Musaf of the first day of Rosh Hashanah. We say that. In Melech Elyon, in the first day of Rosh Hashanah, we say in the Musaf of Rosh Hashanah. And there the expression says Sevel hakel, not Sevel es hakel. In the footnote, they mark that. What means Sevel es hakel? That he contains it all. But not all contain him. It's somewhat the expression, I think, from the Maharal's brother. He says, one parent, one father can support 10 children, and 10 children can't support one father. Such an expression. Okay, that could be for other reasons, but the point being that you could have both things at once. One thing totally encompasses the other, and the other does not affect it. Ubalosh Zayar, a third language, a third expression. The Zayar says, Ihu tofis bekula almin, v'les machshava the tfisa beklal. He, tofis bekula almin, he grasps and contains in all worlds, but less machshava the tfisa beklal. Now I'm not sure if it's machshava or midah, or it could be, because I think the expression I recall, Ihu, let me see a second. They say to look at page 5, Tov Kuf Nun Gimel, and below they mark Tov Kuf Nun Gimel. Let me see the language there. Just give me a moment. Yeah. Okay. I remember the expression, Iu Tofis B'Kul Alma, V'lei Alma Tofis Bey, or something like that. Let me see a second. Less machshov. Yeah. Correct. Iu Tofis B'Kul Alma, less machshov Tfisa Beiklal. So he grasps all. He can understand us, but we can't understand him. If you use the word machshava here. We're now on top of page 380. Afilu b'tzimtzum ha'achren. Even in the lowest tzimtzum, the last tzimtzum, meaning asiya v'asiya, in the lowest levels, the Shem Elikim of Shem Elikim b'asiya, ein keyach nivdal klal melakus kanal. It essentially is not a separate koyach, separate faculty from God at all. Kanal, as we learned earlier, v'dai lemevin, v'dal. Okay, here I will stop for questions, because the next piece is going to conclude what he began, the topic he began on page 374 with Yesh Ma'ayin. Going to be like the conclusion of Yesh Ma'ayin, and then he's going to go back to Shema Yisrael. So that's how he explains this idea that Elikus is no shinui, so therefore it's quite conclusive actually. Even though initially it seemed like the Mittler Rebbe was going back and forth, first saying there's no shinui, then saying there's a shinui due to the Aveda, but then going back again, there's no shinui. It's very clear at the end that even as the Elikus comes down below, where there is an impact due to Aveda, in the Koyach Eliki of creation, There's no shift, there's no change because there's nothing commensurate. And that's these bonanus that he's going to explain, the Yeshma Ayin is bonanus, that's going to lead us back to the Shema concept of Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, the Yichud. Because this is a tremendous concept in Yichud, that God's unity remains intact. Nothing has changed. So even if we don't see it, or we don't experience that seamlessness, but the seamlessness is actually there, and the more you contemplate on it, the more you can integrate it, and the more effect it will have on us and on the animal soul, as we shall learn. So let me stop here if anybody wants to ask anything. We're on top of page 380 so far. Go ahead.
So in in the lowest level, which is connected to our worlds, there is no shinui there also. I know, but the Eibishter even higher.
Just read the words yourself. He says the words, how many times has he said it? It says, "Ein," not just "ein shinui," "ein shinu klal uklal." That's exactly what we're learning.
But it is creating a change. So there is, I'm talking now about the lowest.
I just gave a bunch of examples. Is what kind of change is there in the king when his command is being fulfilled by some individual detail? The change is in the person who's doing it. The king's machshava is being exactly as it was before he created the world. That's exactly as it goes through the world. And the world does not change or affect him in the creative process. Why does it have to? Where do you see that it has to create a change? There's, like he says, it's ein arech. He says clearly, ein arech klal bein bal gvul abilti bal gvul kvol savusim afilu b'chinas hakeach is nivdel matzvus ein lecha dover chutz mimenu, from the perspective of God. There's no change, for example, in the intelligence of a teacher when he diminishes his ideas to say Aleph, Beis, Gimel. The changes in the Makabel, in the recipient. The example I gave before. And he says clearly, Shnei Memes ve'ein seisim zeh zeh klal.
My question's different. Why would you think there would be a change? Once you understand the infinite distance and the fundamentally different natures of the Bria from the creator, and that's clear, that logic.
You just answered it. Once you understand, you use those words. Once you understand, you're right, then there is no change. But if you don't understand, you can go like the philosophers, or even the first Mukabolim, and you could think it's terms of yesh mi yesh. Once you understand what he just said in the last 5 pages, yes, that's exactly this contemplation. If you don't say Shema, and you don't talk about Yichud, most people wouldn't say that. I mean, I mean, you could always say it mitzad amuna, that you have faith that way, but explanation is when you start understanding that infinite distance and so on. Look, I believe that these things are best learned again and again. I don't necessarily think everybody's going to get it the first time we read it. We learned this already in Ayin Beis at length, just for the record. And there he did explain even more. So if you want to understand it better, I would go back to Ayin Beis. I don't want to go to Ayin Beis myself right now. I'd rather read on, and then we could always go back to Ayin Beis. But this idea was explained for a good 10 pages almost in Ayin Beis, maybe less. And now he's saying it here. The content we're reading here, if you want to know where it is in Ayin Beis, that's what I would advise. Because look, I've read this and learned this hundreds of times. I'm being very perfectly honest. So I'm not going to compare it to someone who's read it or heard it the first time or 5 times even. Hundreds of times, literally. And I'm not saying that as I'm not saying to talk about myself. I did it. And I know how difficult it is. And every time you read it, you have to still struggle with it because it's just, you know why? Because it's not tangible. Everything we know about life is change. Everything. There's nothing that doesn't change. I mentioned the other day, scientific, everything is changing all the time. You're aging from second to second. Everything in this material world is some way going through shifts and changes. I'm not talking about what type of change or how big the change is, but change. Change is synonymous with existence. So the concept of no change, really no change, is something that is not that we don't have tangible examples for it. That's why you learn Chassidus. Chassidus is giving the Nefesh Abamis, especially, needs a lot of work to get that, because it doesn't get that. The Nefesh Abamis says, give me my pleasures, give me my desires. I'm very happy with my life. Stop making me crazy with these concepts of eternity and immortality and infinity and so on. It takes a lot of work because it's not what we are accustomed to, which is exactly what Chassidus came to do, is teach us things we're not accustomed to, coming to teach us a new paradigm, the paradigm of immutability, the paradigm of godliness, and trying to make that part of who we are. So it shouldn't surprise anyone that's very difficult to really fully grasp, because it's not something that you can easily. I guarantee you, go speak to a rational scientist, and many will not accept this idea. They'll say, no, this is outside of the realm of science. Either they'll say it's mumbo jumbo based on religious superstition, or they'll say it's not in the realm of science, it's maybe metaphysics, whatever they want to call it, mysticism. Because in the world of science, everything is changeable. Everything is subject to the laws of nature and so on and so forth. The idea of a creator that's infinitely distant from us was never easily to conceive. That's why philosophers never went there. They always saw it as God as the first cause. He's the first cause, right? But he's not beyond that. But by us, we can't even call him a cause. Remember how many times we've learned that you can't even call him a ila v'siba. You can't even call God a cause of existence, because cause immediately suggests cause and effect, that he has a relationship. Fine, he's the father and we're the child, but a father is still an entity. Even Adam HaRishon was the first father, he's still a created entity. So who created that first one? That leap from creator to creation is the hardest leap. From creation to another creation is already easy to understand. Once you have a tree, or once you have earth, one fruit creates another. Once you have the first one. But who put the first one there? That's the hardest thing. The leap from ayin to yesh is the hard thing to wrap our head around. Yesh to yesh is the story of history, the story of life. So it's all about coming to introduce that new type of paradigm into our lives. So I would suggest every one of you, in your own way, learn it, read it as many times as you wish. I do not think, as much as you may be getting clarity from me because I'm explaining it, for you to own it, you're going to need to think about it, maybe write it down, review it with others, explain it to someone else. Because right now you are, in a sense, receiving what I'm clarifying here. And maybe my clarity is somewhat affecting you for the moment. But until you can't speak about it to someone else and explain it to them or write it down in words in a coherent way, you really haven't owned it. And owning takes time. It simply takes time because you need to review it again and again and again. And I think, as you'll see, who mentioned it? First, you learn it and understand it. Then you come to a point that you're completely confused and don't understand it. Then you think you understand it again. Then you get confused again. That's all normal. It happens to me all the time, every day. Ideas that I thought I understood really well, then I read something, and then for some reason, and then you go again through it. It's not, and you're not going in a merry-go-round. It's not back to square one. It's a constant process of deeper integration, deeper absorption of, and deeper appreciation of the idea and ways that you really can relate to. Ultimately, that's what Yichud is about. You're beginning with an idea that's foreign to you. Slowly, you're making it your own. And that takes time. I am sure you can give me examples of ideas that you began at some point, had no clue. Then you began to have some semblance. Then a little more, and a little more, a little more. At some point, you can say, I don't say own it, but I feel I really get it. And that's a process. I've never seen that happen overnight. You don't get it immediately. I mean, there are times you have a glimpse and you hear something and say, that's so geschmack, but still, it still needs the bina. That's the chachma. the bina is necessary to internalize. I feel very much the Mittler Rebbe does exactly that. That's why he's sharing with us his flow of consciousness. As he's writing this, it seems to me like he's developing it. Not just he developed it and he's sharing what he developed, he's actually showing us how it's developing. That's a sense I have as well. Obviously, on a much higher level than we are, but still, this is like a gift where you see a person on this level literally sharing a whole process. And you see, he says it's not a contradiction. Both are true. He's telling us the logical arguments that he would be making to himself, sharing the idea with us. So that's a short, I guess, overview of the approach to how to integrate this material.
This is very fascinating. You gave the model from the king, but the king, until the end, at the same, he sees the goal, but Ela Moshel, Doimel Nimshel, because the king is not feeling in his own mind at the end. He could see the goal, but he's not feeling the same thing like when he is for himself, before the reality.
First of all, God, he spoke about safe ma'aseh b'machshava tchila. Like God, he does see the end. He does see it all. And the fact that we don't see it, that's from our point of view.
Because by God, there is no other thing. There's only him. That's
what he's talking about. He's talking about God then. The example is an example, like he says earlier, if you look on top where he says, moving al kabosh, EF shalachal klal klal, the gimel madreges, the machshava dibur maisel, kamei ba'odam, shemitzav lasis b'machshava shebedibur. Anyway, again, I recommend that you read it again and again, as many times as you need, and write it down for yourself and try to understand or explain it to somebody else. I'm happy to continue discussing, but I know there's a limit. As much as I say now, it will never replace your need to exert yourself and delve into this. That's all I'm saying. I'm happy to talk about it and answer questions, but I know what the process. Are there other questions? So in Ayin Beis, I was going to tell you the parallel pages here are well, it really begins page 1467. That corresponds to page 374. But it continues from 1467, especially once you get to pages 1470, 1471, and 1472. That's this section that we learned are those pages. So those elaborate more on this topic. They quote the Mittler Rebbe's lines, but the Rebbe Rashab expands on it. So I would definitely recommend going there, and that's what I would do if I were you. If you really want to get this, I would read the Mittler Rebbe again, go to those pages I just referred to, and the more you do it, the closer you'll get to understanding it. But I think from my end, I've covered pretty much the explanation. But again, things that you need to do your homework, impossible for me to do for you. So I think we'll stop here. The next section, even though I could read it now, I want to read it more slowly because it's the conclusion of this whole theme of Yesh Ma'ayin that's going to lead us then into Shema Yisrael. Okay. Are there any other questions? Are there anything you want to address? I'm going to stop here on the second line on top of page 380. The lay of the land is, then he goes back next paragraph to Shema, Das Elyon, Das Tachten, the two Yehudim, the higher level of Yehud. And the Shema will lead to Vahafta of the Nefesh Habamis on 387. On 389, you go back to the Shemen Upsila and the oil, the wick, and the fire. And on 390 at the bottom, he goes to Ner Mitzvah V'Teira Eir. That's the structure of the Mittler Rebbe that we're going to be leading into. So things are coming together. Okay, we'll stop here.
Can I just make a quick, did you turn off the recording?
Not yet, go ahead, please.
A quick announcement about the fundraising for the books. As most of you know, Rabbi Jacobson is printing.
As a matter of fact, before you continue, 1 second, Yitzchak. I'm going to post on the group right now a picture of all the thousands of books as they are now being stored, as they arrived.
Very exciting.
Continue.
So the books that Rabbi Jacobson's referring to are a special edition of his famous award-winning Toward a Meaningful Life, which are being printed for the Israeli soldiers fighting in the war against the Hamas in Gaza. And this is a way to give them strength, spiritual inspiration, both to fight the war and God's willing after the war. They should live a whole life filled with godly meaning. And so any donation would be great. The link is in the WhatsApp group, but also just to repeat it, it's meaningfullife.com, and meaningful life is just 2 L's / Operation Spiritual Sword. So www.meaningfullife.com, Operation Spiritual Sword. And make any donation, any amount is appreciated. If you give $100 or more, you get a free copy of this special edition of the book, which almost no one else in the world will have or be able to get. And if you give 180 or more, then Rabbi Jacobson will put a personal inscription to you. So please, before the end of the year, want to get that tax deduction. Today's December 28th. You got 3 days to take advantage of this opportunity, become a spiritual warrior, to do your part to help battle against evil. And I hope you all will, if you haven't already, to those who have, thank you very much. And we'll be processing, who gets a book in the coming few weeks. We're trying to sort it all out, but thank you all very much. And Hatzlacha.
Yeah, and the books are actually on the way to New York now. We asked them to send us a few hundred. So we're going to get them very shortly. They may even be here today or tomorrow. We'll see. And it's all exciting. I just posted some very nice pictures. The picture of the soldiers, if you don't mind, don't publicize yet, because we always need permission for that. But internally, I could share it with you. Very nice picture of a bunch of soldiers holding the book, and you'll see literally the skids of books that as they've been delivered. Check it out in the Ayin Bay's group. Thank you, Yitzchak, again. Yeah, we are excited about it, and we're getting great feedback from people on the front. So they literally have it in their hand. We literally know people who have it in their knapsack when they're fighting some of these battles. So that's a tremendous way of partnering with them, bringing them something so spiritual sword. Yeah, exactly as you said.
These photos are unbelievable. Just really, it gives me chills to see, good chills to see all these books. Wow, wow, wow.
Yeah, more to come, more to come. Did I share the one with the commander of the Israeli, the major general?
Yeah, the Air Force, I think, of the Navy. Yeah, he did.
Yeah. Yeah, they're still going to be coming by the loads because they're now beginning the more, their distribution is being done in a measured way because we want them to be appreciated and individually delivered, not like in mass, So they're figuring out the right system of who's doing delivery, make sure they come back with a report at the end of the day, how many were delivered. They don't want books lying around and hanging around like that,
Just amazing.